Okay, welcome to El Maestro. My name is Lecha III, and you are with me. Thank you for joining me on the 8th episode of this podcast. It's good to have you. Today is June 2nd, and I hope it has cooled down where you are. It was incredibly and exorbitantly hot a couple of days ago. And it was a reminder that summer is on the horizon. And it was too hot for me. I'm sure it was for you too. It was in the 90s. The only thing good about the weather being that hot in the day is that it is peaceful and pleasant and lovely at night. But that doesn't make up for the heat during the day. So I'm glad that you have joined us. Let me go ahead and go over some of the quick items that we do before every podcast. The first is where you can find me. You can follow me at Victor Lecha, spelled Lecha the third, on Facebook. We also have a Facebook page called El Maestro Podcast. In fact, on all platforms, you can just find us with El Maestro Podcast. You can find this specific podcast on Spotify and on YouTube. You can also find us on TikTok for quick highlight clips or reels, and Instagram as well. That is still forthcoming. It is in development. So if you go look now, the clips are not up to date, but they will be eventually. But it's, just to give you an idea of how we're trying to grow the platform and trying to spread the message. What else? Well, I also suffer from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD. And the reason why I tell you this is not to garner your sympathy, but if you give me some, I surely will take it. But sometimes during the podcast, you may notice that I'm having difficulty recollecting what I want to say, or I get some facts mixed up. That's my ADHD. And so that's why at the top of every show, I always have a piece or a portion of that show called corrections. And honestly, last show was really, even though it was the longest podcast we had done, it was the least error-free show that I have done. There's only one correction. Although in pure or in perfect ADHD fashion, I can't remember what that correction was, and I didn't write it down. I thought I would remember it, and on the way here to do the podcast, I'd forgotten it. So I'll give it to you next week when we do the corrections for that show. But I can just tell you it wasn't that big of a deal. So let me go over some of the stories we're going to talk about today, and I'm just going to get right into it. We're going to go ahead and try quick highlights again, but we're going to call them the not so quick highlights. Or excuse me, not highlights, there's my ADHD, headlines. Last week we tried quick headlines, and I just wanted to touch on certain stories without elaborating too much on them. But, there's just so much to unpack on all of these, and I love to give you the content. And from what I'm hearing from my subscribers, they really enjoy the content too. So I'm just going to continue to give it to you in the same fashion. So we're going to call these the not so quick headlines, or maybe they should be quick, but they're not quick headlines. Something like that. I haven't come up with the full title yet. But just to give you an idea that they should be quick headlines, but, depending on how much there is to unpack, I may go on a little more about it. And for those not so quick headlines, we're going to be talking about the EU's response and UK's response to Trump saying that he's going to increase steel tariffs to 50% after he promised he wouldn't. So I have some thoughts on that. I also I have some thoughts in regards to how the war in Russia is going, and with a new perspective I want to bring to it in regards to the economic cost for Russian citizens and how else that money could have been used. Because, one of the things about war is I mean, for Ukraine, they don't really have a choice, right? I mean, they're defending themselves. But Russia, well, I shouldn't say Russia really had a choice, because we'll talk about how Vladimir Putin silenced his critics and dissenters, and he'll even poison them. So it's very hard for people to go ahead and to be a voice of opposition or of constructive criticism or dissent in Russia. So I say that they had a choice, but they really didn't have a choice. Vladimir Putin made the choice for them, which was to go ahead and to plunge them into this very costly war, not just regarding lives, about 1 million Russian dead now, innocent Russians dead, but also in regards to the economic costs that it has placed on the country. That money could have been used so many different ways, and we'll get into that. I also want to speak about how Trump's tariffs were postponed. Yay! Fantastic! Yes, we did it! Just for a day. It, unfortunately, it didn't last that long. Although it was a green day, surprisingly, or not so surprisingly. So I have some other headlines, too, to get into. I don't want to give them all to you. I do want to give you the funny headlines, though. Apparently, and if you listen to a previous podcast, you know about the crazed woodpecker that had been attacking a Maryland suburb, specifically the cars there. Well, now there's a crazed duck on the loose in Florida and Cape Coral neighborhood. What is going on with these birds? Now, Alfred Hitchcock tried to warn us. Is it happening? Is the Birds movie finally coming into fruition? We'll get more into that. Also, what cartoons did you watch as a kid? I know in the UK there was like Will o' the Wisp. I never got to see it. And that was more maybe for like childhood. I'm going to talk about my own childhood and specifically adolescence. We came up watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, and Transformers. That's right. Millennials, Gen X, and Gen Alpha, those genres started in Generation X. So what cartoons did you watch? Let me know. React to me. Did you happen to watch any cartoons that were little babies or children of political figures? You say what? I say, have you? Because in Russia, they have a cartoon that includes childlike figures of prominent political figures right now in geopolitics. I am not kidding you. So we'll get into that. And finally, before we get into today's stories, just your guess. What company would be the most revenue efficient company in the world? Meaning revenue per employee. We have a lot of good companies here. Nvidia, is it Meta, Apple, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Tesla, Amazon? You can go ahead and think about which company is the most revenue efficient, meaning which company has the highest revenue per employee. And then we'll go into that later on. And you might be saying, well, sounds like a funny story. Why is that part of the funny story segment? Well, you got to wait for it. There's a punchline. So that's just to go ahead and to whet your appetite. So let's go ahead and get into it. I have a lot of news to get to you, and I want to keep it at the hour, like I always say, but really, I'm going to do it today. I believe we'll keep it on the hour. Most of the time I do. Last week was an exception because we had so much news to get to. So I think today we'll be able to get through all the news that we have to get to, through all the content we have to get to, and it'll be an hour. The first thing I wanted to bring up was, you probably remember how there was this bickering, this war of words between Walmart and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump saying, why are you going to raise prices Well, because of your tariffs, Donald, this is what happens. They get passed down to the consumer, and then the companies have to go ahead and decide whether they can absorb the cost or pass it on to consumers. And for the most part, they're going to pass it down to the consumer because they want to go ahead and continue to be competitive. They want to go ahead and meet the goals to their shareholders, and they want to be able to retain their employees. And to be able to do that, they need to be as profitable as possible. So, Donald Trump was really singling out Walmart. But as we told you before, as we started this podcast, we're now in the second month. As we started this podcast, we've mentioned it on each episode. Some episode we've delved into it more about how it was going to really impact American companies importing and exporting. And it wasn't just going to be, a handful. I mean, it wasn't just going to be like one or two. It's going to be a lot of companies that are affected. And this is why we're worried about inflation. Now, just to give you a quick update, the PCE came out, the Personal Consumer Expenditures Report, which is the preferred gauge for the Federal Reserve, and it came in lower. So it doesn't appear yet that the tariffs have really impacted inflation. Now, remember, we're on this pause with Liberation Day, and it's been readjusted with China. But still, the inflation has cooled. So it has not actually gone up as perhaps we were expecting that it would. That doesn't mean that it won't. It just hasn't yet. So what other companies, and the concern about that is, let me put a bow on that. The concern about that is that if these companies, American companies, have to pass down the cost to the consumer, not only do they have to pay more, that increases inflation. So what other companies are having to pass down the cost for consumers and increase prices? Well, we already mentioned to you Walmart, but Costco's saying they're going to do it. Best Buy, Nike, Target, and Macy's. So where are you, Donald Trump? Are you going to get upset at those retailers too? Are you going to get upset at every American retailer and prove what I have been saying, that you cannot be America first? If you are putting these American retailers in a position where they have to decide whether to pass the cost down to the American consumer or absorb it themselves, and you're definitely not America first either, because you're putting the American consumer and the American companies in the same boat. So if they pass the cost down, then that affects the American consumer. And if the companies absorb the cost, then it affects the American companies. You're not America first. You may say you are, but your actions are showing differently with these tariffs. I mean, all these companies are asking you to repeal it. So we'll get into that, though. We'll get into that some more later. That was a quick headline, or not so quick headline. As you could tell, it was not so quick. So we'll get into that later. Into more depth, because I want to talk about how the tariffs were paused. I also want to, in the not so quick headlines that should be quick, maybe that's what it'll be. The not so quick headlines that should be quick. I also want to go ahead and continue our conversation with politics in the United Kingdom, specifically how Labour has been acting like red Tories, and they've been stumbling out of the gate. And they have been proposing draconian cuts instead of how to continue the benefits and the safety net programs that UK residents and citizens need. Well, here's something good. I want to go ahead and give credit where credit is due. Labour has announced a $1.2 billion investment in repairs to crumbling schools and the NHS infrastructure. Fantastic. And that's what we need, Labour. We need more of that. But I want you to know that I'm not going to go ahead and just look at this one story and neglect the others where you are falling short. And we're still talking about the winter fuel payments that you have cut from some pensioners, and the 2-child cap, which you say we can't afford to go ahead and remove. But Nigel Farage said he could. And I went ahead and ran the numbers for you, as I told you I would. And we're going to take a look at it. But before I do that, when I was in the UK, there actually were a lot of stories about schools actually crumbling. You're like, what? No, there was. So, and the Tories, which was the governing conservative party at that time, wasn't doing enough or doing anything at all, really, to address that issue and problem. And of course, the NHS, which is vitally important to Great Britain. So it's good that 1.2 billion is being invested. But let's go ahead and go more into the winter fuel payments and into the two-child cap. Because remember, Nigel Farage said that if we went ahead and removed foreign aid, the hotel asylums, or asylum hotels, and the net zero subsidies, we'd be able to pay for it. And what happened? Well, instead of Labor actually speaking to the points, they went ahead and did personal attacks on Nigel Farage. Deputy Minister Angela Rayner, and I believe the Housing Secretary, said that he's a snake oil salesman. And recently, Prime Minister Keir Starmer was comparing him to Liz Truss, saying, well, Liz Truss, by the way, for my American listeners, was an interim prime minister, saying that he's coming up with fantasy economics. Let me first speak to this. If you can't speak to the points, then go ahead and stop with the personal attacks. The way that you're going to win political debates, win political discourse, go ahead and continue to garner votes and the confidence necessary in UK citizens and residents. It's not by doing personal attacks on Nigel Farage. It is going by each point he's bringing up and having your own explanation as to either why we can fund those benefits or why we cannot, and why what he's saying is untrue. And speaking of Liz Truss, I'm just going to say this because you went ahead and started it with personal attacks. So now I'm going to go ahead and come in to the defense on the conservative side. At least they've had some female prime ministers, Labor. How many have you had? 0, none, not even one. And the conservatives have had 2? Horrible. Now that that's been settled, let's go ahead and look into these numbers as to if it is possible that the cutting or the reallocating of those funds would be able to fund the winter fuel payments and removing the two-child cap. So the winter fuel payments approximately cost $2.2 billion a year. To remove the two-child cap, that would cost anywhere between $2.5 to $3.5 billion. Now, I asked GBT, what is the foreign aid budget for the United Kingdom? It is $15.3 billion. The budget for asylum seekers is $3 billion. And the net zero subsidies, which have been occurring for 10 years, 20 years, 22 years, from 2002 to 2024, is roughly $10 billion a year. So yes, Labor, Nigel Farage is right. There is plenty of money to reallocate to give UK citizens back their winter fuel payments and to remove the two-child cap. And we talked about how removing the two-child cap would be beneficial also for the GDP because you get more people into the workforce. Because now you have actually given an incentive for those UK citizens and residents to have children, and hopefully those children get into the workforce. That increases revenue and also taxable income. And what I mean by revenue, productivity for the workers in the company they're employed by. But here's where we have to be worried about Nigel Farage. And I understand, as I've mentioned to you, out of all of the parties that are remaining, besides the establishment parties, which would be the Tories and Labour, the non-establishment parties are Green, Lib Dem, and Reform UK. I'm weary and leery of Reform UK because some of the things they say. But they bring up good points, and what's frustrating is, instead of Labour taking on those points, they're just doing personal attacks. That's not going to work to sway the voters. And that's why I liked how last week we talked about the Green Party talking about how we could go ahead and do a wealth tax, because they're talking about the points instead of budget cuts. But getting back to my point about why what Nigel Farage said, now that I've done some research, I can see is a little, what's the word? It was sneaky. Because really, net zero subsidies, we need that for climate change. And I know in the United Kingdom, net zero is a big goal, and very much there is a lot of consensus in regards to doing that. Not just in regards to the community and residents, but also businesses. And the reality is you don't have to cut net zero subsidies. You could keep them. And by going ahead and reallocating the foreign aid budget and asylum seeker hotels budget, which totals $18.3 million, we'd be able to have the winter fuel payments and remove the 2-child cap. Remember that the foreign aid budget and asylum seeker hotels is $18.3 billion, and the winter fuel payment and remove the 2-child cap is $4.7 to $5.7 billion. So my gosh, I mean, like, what? You could literally remove, how do you want to do this? Remove half from the asylum seeker, 1.5, maybe that's too much. Remove $1 billion, and then the other 5 from the foreign aid budget, and you have the winter fuel payments, and to remove the 2-child cap. So those are questions that I hope Liberal Dems and Greens start to bring up in Parliament in regards to, want to bring it up during PM questions, PMQs. By the way, for those in America, I think it's every Wednesday or some day every week, all of Parliament asks questions to the Prime Minister. I would like someone to ask him, why can't we do that to save the winter fuel payments and then remove the 2-child cap? Because here's the thing. I think we do need to go ahead and help those who need help. I think we should. It's a responsibility. We are living in the world, and there's benefits to it. I don't want to go into it right now, but there are benefits, and you can look them up. So I do see there's a value to the foreign aid budget and asylum seeker hotel budget. But when your own citizens and residents are complaining about cost of living and are suffering under the economic conditions and the large debt, and you're planning to cut more of their benefits instead of taking from the foreign aid and asylum seeker hotel budget, that's poor stewardship. Your first and foremost commitment and priority should be UK citizens and UK residents. That is who you swore an oath to. But correct me if I'm wrong. Now, in times of prosperity, yes, absolutely we should do that. And here's what's really, I don't want to say shocking, but interesting. In 2005, the foreign aid budget was $7.4 billion. It is doubled now in 20 years. So there's room to scale it back. And we should. Continuing on the not so quick headlines that should be quick. I want to bring up, this is a big deal. First, I want to bring up, I mentioned the issue in regards to social housing in the United Kingdom. And I saw this article in The Guardian. And for those in the United States, social housing is to help house the homeless and those who are in need. So there are duties placed on local councils to make sure they house the homeless and those in need. There's actual laws placed on them. Now, one of the main, how do I want to say this? Let me just go ahead and one of the main CEOs of a nonprofit. He's the head of one of UK's biggest nonprofit housing providers. Sorry, I got a little mixed up there. But he's the head of one of the UK's biggest nonprofit housing providers. And he is actually making a point as to why there needs to be more investment into social housing. And what I didn't know is it's not designated as a critical national infrastructure as other things are in the United Kingdom. For example, roads and energy networks, food, health. We talked about national health care. So if social housing would be considered critical national infrastructure, then it would unlock potentially so much more money, maybe billions. I'm not sure. I don't have the number here. But it would allow the Chancellor Rachel Reeves to commit extra funds without breaking her fiscal rules. And it was an interview with the chair of the Housing Association, Ian McDermott, who is the CEO of Peabody. His intervention comes as 11 of the country's major providers wrote in a letter to the housing minister, Matthew Pennycock, ahead of next month's spending review, that the government has inherited the worst housing situation in living memory. That is quite a striking statement from not only this head of Peabody, the head of this association, but also 11 of the country's major providers. So let me break this down for you. There are 11 of these major providers who provide social housing, and they're saying we need more help. And if you go ahead and designate social housing as a critical infrastructure, it will unlock billions. Now, why hasn't this been done already? We know that housing should be a human right. When people aren't housed, we can go into it. All sorts of detrimental things happen, not only to the individual, but also to the communities and the system. So it's really shocking to me how this hasn't been done. And again, it shows as to how there are other ways for labor to be able to handle these crises. So if labor goes ahead and designates social housing as a critical infrastructure, you heard here by this interview from The Guardian and this Peabody boss, or this Peabody, the head of Peabody, Ian McDermott. He said if it's reclassified by the Treasury, this will allow the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, to commit extra funds without breaking her fiscal rules, unlocking billions. I think it means, I don't know exactly what that means. I have my idea. It means I think they could go ahead and add more funding to it without it adding to the debt. That would be my assumption, and I'll get the answer for you. Now, this is important because labor had a huge goal. It was ambitious, of building 1.5 million homes. This would go a long way into doing that. For far too long, social housing has been seen as a subsidy and a cost rather than an asset and critical national infrastructure for the country. Absolutely right. It is a critical national infrastructure for the county. He also warns that 90% of the current spending on social housing was on subsidies and temporary accommodation rather than bricks and mortar, the reverse of what had been the case in the 70s. How is that even possible? 90% is based on subsidies and temporary accommodations? Let me explain it for you, America. When you do qualify for social housing, there may not be an availability yet. So you get placed into temporary accommodation until there's an opening. Now, you're still housed. But let me tell you, temporary accommodation, I don't think is your own room all the time. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's living more like in a residential facility than your own home, than your own flat or apartment. So I'm really hoping that Labour does this. This would be another way to show the UK citizens and residents that you are actually Labour and you're not red Tories. Finally, before we get off of the not so quick, that should be quick headlines. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told the sector regulator on Monday, we're still on UK news, that capital spending would be almost halved in 2025 and 2026 to 84 million from a multi-year equivalent, an annual allocation of 150 million. So higher education is getting their budget slashed next year from 150 million to 84 million. This is what we're talking about, Labour, and this is the problem. Here you are cutting again instead of trying to find a way to go ahead and to keep those budgets at least the same levels. They're planning to go ahead and divert money from journalism, media studies, to place it into more lab-based courses. But I mean, who doesn't need, we need good journalists, and media is very important nowadays, especially with the amount of fake news that's out there. So come on, Labour. You did one thing bloody brilliant, which was investing 1.2 billion, but still a lot to go. Let me see you reallocate that foreign aid budget and the temporary asylum hotel budget. Let's find a way to make social housing a critical infrastructure. And don't cut higher education. I can tell you right now, you're not going to get Gen Alpha and Gen Z voters that way. That's basically it for the quick, not so quick headlines. Did we do it? Well, we're at 30 minutes, so I'll leave that to you. I don't know. We started at about 10 minutes, so I'm going to still say they're not so quick headlines. Maybe what we'll do is every show, we'll try and do it quick. Maybe I'll say like within 10 to 15 minutes. And if I can't do it, it remains the not so quick, should be quick headlines. But if I'm able to, then it'll be quick headlines. Hopefully don't return to not so quick headlines the following week. Really quickly, I did want to just go back to how Donald Trump increased the aluminum and steel tariffs to 50% on everyone. And the UK Trade Secretary seeking an exemption. US steelmakers say it's another body blow. And the EU strongly regrets the US plan to double steel tariffs. Look, and this is why I said when Prime Minister Keir Starmer made that deal, that trade deal with President Trump, and left the 10% blanket tariff there, and the steel tariffs were removed, I believe. I'll have to double check for you. This could be a correction. But even if they weren't, I'm almost positive they were removed. But even if they weren't removed, they were left at 25%. No, I'm positive they were removed. But either way, even if they weren't, this is exactly who you're dealing with. And I don't know why you're surprised. That's what they say. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I mean, you've seen how erratic and how irrational President Donald Trump is with these tariffs. What would make you think that when you sign a trade deal with him, that he wouldn't change his mind an hour later, or a day later, or a week later, or a month later, or a year later, as he's done with the steel tariffs? So you need to do better, EU and UK, for your people. And recognize, just the evidence that's being presented in front of you. This is why China has stated, and this is why they held their line, and the same as Canada. Because they understand the temperament and the personality of who they're dealing with. When will you? China has stated for people to, unite against bully Trump. I mean, I leave that for all y'all to figure out. But certainly don't create a trade deal and then start touting it about how great it is, because it could change within the hour. Now, hopefully you won't have to deal with that if a lower court ruling is held up. You say, what do you mean? Well, a lower federal court, the U.S. Court of International Trade on Wednesday, struck down the tariffs imposed on virtually every country by President Donald Trump. Yeah, we did it! Woohoo! Yes! Finally! And what happened on that day? It was bully. 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 And when I say bully, I mean bullish. It was a green day. However, the following day or day after, an appeals court reinstated the tariffs. Oh, psych! I mean, all these people were like, yes, finally, our 401ks and 403bs and pensions and portfolios are safe. Not yet. But this is still very good news. What's really interesting is the reasoning as to why the lower court went ahead and struck down Trump's tariffs. They say he exceeded the authority granted to him under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. They're essentially saying that Trump's reasoning for doing the tariffs is not considered a national emergency. And what is Trump's national emergency? Trade deficits. It's a trade deficit. And you might say, yeah, the trade deficit's really bad. What are you laughing? No, our debt is really bad. The trade deficit and the debt are two totally different things. The trade deficit is just a result of the global economy. Americans like to purchase things abroad. I mean, how are you going to blame them for that? I mean, that's all it really is. I mean, this is not an emergency. It's just, market behavior. That line, by the way, that this is not an emergency, it's just market behavior. I'm paraphrasing, but it comes from my GBT Eva as we were having this conversation. Really quickly, a side note, you always hear about how our trade deficit's so bad with China. It actually has gone down. It's $300 billion. With the rest of the world, it's $1 trillion. That goes to show you. Well, we want to buy things that come from, throughout the world. Just like people buy from us. They're just buying from us less. So I mean, you could be concerned about that, I guess. I mean, yeah, sure, be concerned about it. But is it an emergency? No. The debt is an emergency. The Fed has said we're on an unsustainable path. Us being the only developed country in the world not to have national health care is an emergency. By the way, India joins us too now because I would say they're a developed country. They also don't have national health care. So we're not alone anymore. Yay! But you want to know, and some people may disagree with that last one, but look, national health care is a human right. And I don't know if I'll ever see it in my lifetime here in this country. I don't think so, which is unfortunate. But it is. And that's why almost every developed country in the world has it that way. But you want to know what is a national emergency and we all can agree on? 169 mass shootings in 5 months, which have resulted in 216 deaths and 643 injuries. You know what else is a national emergency that we can agree upon? That there have been at least 30 school shootings in K through 12 and higher education institutions in 5 months. With 10 of those shootings having injured or killed students. That is a national emergency. The mass shooting crisis in the United States is a national emergency. And why no president has declared it a national emergency yet is beyond me. It boggles the mind. The streets are running red with people's blood in America because we can't seem to get a handle on the mass shooting crisis. 169 mass shootings is approximately 34 mass shootings a month in 5 months. So that amounts to basically one a day. One time a day, we're having a mass shooting in America. Now, I'm going to get to this in a minute for those who are gun rights advocates, because I come with a different perspective on the left. And I think we need to start thinking about better and new solutions on how to get a handle to minimize these mass shootings. You know, when I lived in Great Britain, it was fantastic. Never saw a headline for a mass shooting. Ever. I was there 15 months. I didn't see one. Not one. Now, I saw stabbings. But wouldn't you rather be dealing with stabbings than mass shootings? 10 school shootings in 5 months is 2 per month. 1 every 2 weeks. How is this not a national emergency already? Now, you're going to hear the left say, we got to get rid of AR-15s. And I'm going to tell you, there are so many mass shootings that happen without AR-15s. That's not going to solve the problem. And then you're going to hear the gun lobby say that nothing needs to be done whatsoever. Don't have to close the gun show loophole, which allows for someone to get a gun without a background check. We actually had a chance to pass comprehensive gun safety, gun reform package. And we even had an exemption for hunters, because I know it's a big deal. It was all worked out. And Senator Joe Manchin went ahead and killed that bill. You're not in office anymore, Manchin. You could have passed it. And we actually might be making a dent on all of these mass shootings. I'll tell you one thing, it couldn't be any worse. What's my idea? I mean, here's the thing. I work in the mental health field. I do believe a lot of these shootings, we just had one in Memorial Day, and that's what kind of turned me on to this topic again, because I wasn't hearing anyone in Congress speak about it. And I started looking at it again, and no one's bringing it up anymore because we've become desensitized to it, unfortunately. And I knew it was going to happen. There used to be a time when this never happened in regards to school shootings. I remember the first one in Columbine. I was so surprised. I never had to go through that as a Gen Xer. David Hogg, the vice chair of the DNC, is a survivor of gun violence on his high school campus in Parkland. And for some reason, the Democratic National Committee is trying to kick him out of the party. Or at least kick him out of the committee. That's how desensitized we've become. Now, I do believe that there's mental health issues here. And you'll hear Republicans who are tied with the gun lobby. We're going to get to the National Rifle Association in a minute. They'll say, oh, it's a mental health issue, mental health issue. Yeah, okay. So if it's a mental health issue and you recognize that it's a crisis and it needs then crisis-like support and crisis-like revenue, where's the funding? That's not a solution. Just to say, here's what the problem is. You're just pointing to what one of the problems are. Probably the main issue. Fail. Well, you're not going to pass national health care. By the way, in Great Britain, they're now, and I believe, so this is under Labour stewardship, so well done, Labour. They are opening in all of their emergency rooms. Now, over there, it's a little different. Sometimes the emergency rooms are connected to the hospital. Sometimes they're not. So everywhere where there's an emergency room, they're going to have someone there, a mental health team, to speak to someone who's in crisis within 10 minutes. That is what investment into national healthcare infrastructure looks like. Republicans, instead of just saying, yeah, it's a mental health problem, thoughts and prayers. How about it's a mental health problem, thoughts and prayers, and we're going to give you the resources to address it. So we're not going to pass national health care. I just don't see it. I don't see it's going to happen. And I'll be happy when I'm wrong. I'll be like, fantastic, you proved me wrong. What then is our asset? We have a lot of law enforcement. We do. They do really good work. I work with law enforcement not every day, but almost every day. And we do great work for those in mental health crisis in Santa Clara County. What are you saying? I'm saying if one of our big resources is law enforcement, then we need to find a way, create a special unit, task force unit, to be able to notify or to be able to, for them to get pre-warning notice when someone could be potentially a shooter. This shouldn't be hard. In this day of how connected we are with social media, in regards to tax, I don't know what the requirements are to get warrants, but I'm sure that stuff can be looked at. And I know that here comes privacy advocates. I hear you, but I'm tired of seeing 169 mass shootings in 5 months. So if it's possible for law enforcement to be notified of someone who it could be a potential mass shooter before, and start there, and then maybe come up with a crisis mental health team to roll with them. Of course, in that situation, law enforcement would lead, most likely. I don't know. They have to be worked out over several meetings. With us, we normally take the lead. It's fantastic. And we have law enforcement there as support in case someone starts to get a little aggressive. We're not hands-on. And we're not the only... they're rolling these programs all throughout all counties. Mobile crisis teams with police support. That would be my suggestion. I'm curious what the National Rifle Association would say. They're going to be against it. And you say, what? That's not possible. How would they be against it? Now, as I was delving into this topic for you, I was thinking to myself, There was a ban on machine guns in the United States back in 1986. And I thought to myself, I mean, mostly everyone today is for that ban. I can't imagine. I mean, there probably are a few people who aren't. But I would say like 90%, if not more, probably more, are okay with there being a ban on machine guns. And I thought to myself before I asked GBT, I said, I bet you anything the National Rifle Association was not for that ban when it came up. And ding, 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 sure enough, as unbelievable it is, the National Rifle Association was against the ban of civilian possession of machine guns manufactured after May 19th, 1986. The amendment was introduced by Representative William J. Hughes, a Democrat in New Jersey. Here's what's crazy. It wasn't even a ban of all machine guns. All those that were made before 1986 were grandfathered in. And yet the National Rifle Association still was against it. Horrible, NRA. Despicable. Truly. And this is why I go to show. I mean, we need new voices in this. We need new voices in this topic. Because, you know, the voices we have right now are entrenched. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. David Hogg probably doesn't agree with me. But I honestly feel like David Hogg and I could sit down and have a conversation about it and willing to meet to some sort of compromise. We don't have that today in today's politics. And meanwhile, we're having one mass shooting a day. That is a national emergency, President Donald Trump. Not a trade deficit. So, hopefully and ideally, that does get overturned. I know it's going to go to the appeals court in regards to his tariffs being overturned by the lower court because he exceeded his emergency powers. Pretty sure the appeals court will uphold it. And then it goes to the Supreme Court. And I have a feeling they're going to uphold it too. And I don't think it'll be a 5-4 decision. I'm thinking probably 6-3. But it may be more than that. Because, I mean, this is just a really weak premise for calling it an emergency. I do want to let you know we're getting close to the hour. And we are going to go a little bit over, and I'm going to save news that I had for you for next week. So I'm not always going to go as long as I went last week. And again, what's great about this is this is not news that is timely per se. We could talk about this forever. But just to kind of whet your appetite for next week, we're going to be looking at how two cities, both in the Bay Area, for those in the UK, Silicon Valley, one San Francisco, one San Jose, how both mayors are handling budget crises. One is doing fantastic, and the other is doing poorly. The one in San Jose is doing poorly. He's deciding to cut police, fire, and parks and rec while having a lot of reserves still. Whereas San Francisco is still ensuring that their firefighters will be properly funded and is allocating more of their reserves. So we'll go into that next week. But what I wanted to end on, I wanted to go ahead and end on the Russian war and then on the funny stories. And I'm thinking we could do it in an hour and 10 minutes. So we're at 54 minutes right now. So the way we get into this story is Canada. As we talked about, Canada looks like they can lead. And they're continuing to show that they can. They went ahead and proposed to the G7 to lower the price cap of Russian oil from $60 to $50 per barrel. meaning that if Russia was going to use any of the Western channels, they can only sell it at 50 per barrel. The reasoning behind this, it's going to give less to fund the war effort. Fantastic. Suggestion was either backed by Canada or proposed by Canada. It was also supported by, I think, all other G7 members and the European Commission. Who is the one G7 member who opposed this? The United States opposed this proposal. Specifically, I'm going to say President Donald Trump. It's his administration. Now, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is the one who commented on it. But here's all I'm going to say to you before we get into how much this Russia war has costed in total. All I'm going to say to you is, when is Donald Trump going to take some action against Vladimir Putin? No sanctions, no tariffs, and now lowering the cost of oil from 60 to 50 to go ahead and lower the amount of revenue it can use for its war effort. It denies it as well. Where are you, Trump? Tell us why. Tell us why you do not play hardball tactics with Russia, but you instead choose to use appeaser-like diplomacy. You are an appeaser. You won't even lower the cost of oil that Russia exports from $60 to $50 per barrel? My gosh, what will you do? You talk about how this war needs to stop, about how many people have died. You campaigned on ending wars, and yet you do nothing. Now, there is some sort of talk that's going to happen here soon in Turkey. I'm not even going to go into it with you, because until actually something comes out that is credible in regards to what Russia will do to agree to a ceasefire, it's not worth your time. It's a waste of time. Canada, the rest of the G7, and the EU are right on. Look, let's lower the price of oil. At least it gives Russia less revenue to go ahead and to fund its war effort. The other thing too is, and this is just like an ancillary benefit or an added benefit, oil's really low right now. We've talked about how some oil companies have mentioned that their revenue is going to be lower because how low the price of oil is right now, because due to Donald Trump's tariffs. If the United States went ahead and lowered the cap, it would spike, most likely, the domestic producers of oil, meaning Chevron, Shell, Diamondback. So, I mean, it's really confusing and alarming why he's so soft with Russia. The only thing you can say is that he is chosen to be an appeaser. Now, how much would it have affected their revenue to fund the war? If we just take the last 3 years that Russia's been in war, after they placed the cap, if it had been at 50 per barrel, they would have had $82.1 billion less to fund its war effort. That's a decrease of 16.67%. That's a significant cut. And to be honest with you, I'm sure there are many like myself who say it should be more. But at least it would be something in regards to helping to stop Russia's or Vladimir Putin's war effort. And now I'm going to speak to, and I don't know. What do I want to say here? Look, man, I feel for the Russian people. Not for those who support Vladimir Putin, but for those who support him because they're coerced to or they're too scared to say anything. And they actually would prefer to have free elections and to be able to choose someone else. And for those people, let me speak to this. How much has this war cost you? You already know that it's cost a million of your fellow Russians. In regards to what's on the books, it's 344 billion it's cost. That is 26.56 trillion rubles. Now, there's off the books, and I can go into that in the next podcast about what that means. But essentially, what it is banks, state-owned banks, give really easy preferential loans to defense contractors just to keep up the war effort. And sometimes those payments, there are no payment terms on there. The interest rates are very low, meaning that they can default. And of course, eventually you have to pay for that. The Russian people, the Russian taxpayer. And the way they do that is the Russian central bank adds liquidity to these banks who do that. So I'm just going to go with that number. And by the way, that's been confirmed by 4 or 5 reputable sources. I wanted to be sure on that. It's 544 billion it's cost, this war. That's 42 trillion rubles. Now, let's just go by land. And you say, well, look, we're trying to conquer this land from Ukraine. So after 3 years, how much have you got? How much have you captured? You've captured 44,123 square miles, or 114,284 square kilometers. And for those who are pro-Putin, they might say, look how much land we've got. Of course it's worth it. Just so you know, if we took the cost of the war and divided by how much land you've captured, that equates to $4,760,316 US per square kilometer. In rubles, it's 367.5 million rubles. Let me go ahead and give you a comparison as to what that means. There is no square kilometer in St. Petersburg that's worth 367.5 million rubles. There's no place in Moscow, a square kilometer. There are like small sections that are worth 367.5 million rubles. Wouldn't you rather have invested that money in Russia on your own soil than on capturing land that you don't even know if you're going to keep? And it's more valuable than St. Petersburg? I can guarantee you, if you go there, it looks nothing like St. Petersburg. It looks nothing like Moscow. And I've seen pictures of St. Petersburg and Moscow. It looks beautiful. The problem with war is that it's money that could be used on other things, and it's used on killing lives and taking land that you may not even get to keep. That's a bad investment. From what I know about investing. Let me tell you how this alligator, Vladimir Putin, has robbed you Russians. I did some research. It looks like you could use some help on your infrastructure. This money, this 544 billion, could have been used for 1,000 new hospitals. I hear in the rural areas you need new schools. Could have been 10,000 of those. I hear the pensions for old people isn't enough anymore. That the cost of living is getting more expensive. If we went ahead and used this 544 billion, which is 26.56 trillion rubles. And let's just say we decided we were going to go ahead and increase your pension by 100 a month. Right now you get 270 a month. It'll go to 370 a month. Right now you get 25,000 rubles. You would get an additional 7,718 rubles. That's an increase of 30% to your pension. That's 32,718 rubles a month. If we had used that money instead of this war, not only would you have 1 million Russians still alive, you would have 7,718 more rubles in your pension for 10 years, meaning we could fund the increase to your pension by 30% for 10 years. That's how much this war has cost you. It has, from 2021 to 2025, the amount of military spending has increased by 125%. Now your GDP, 7% of it is used for this war, which has no end. And by the way, let's go back to the land. You haven't really claimed any more land in the past year at all. It's a stalemate. And so I'm asking any Russians out there, any ones who remember Vladmir Kara-Murza, Alexei Navalny, who tried to stand up to this autocrat, to this dictator, Vladimir Putin, to go ahead and stop this war. I remember Navalny saying we can use other things in Russia to build Russia instead of funding this war. For some man's ambition and greed to recreate the Soviet Union, at least in regards to land. It's cost you more than the value of St. Petersburg per square kilometer and Moscow, and it looks nothing like it. It's cost you potentially having 30% more to your pension for 10 years. Here's some quotes. Alexei Navalny: we must do what they fear. Tell the truth, spread the truth. This is the most powerful weapon against a regime of liars, thieves, and hypocrites, which is Vladimir Putin's regime. Everyone has this weapon, so make use of it. This is Vladmir Kara-Murza. No matter how powerful the forces against them, when people are prepared to stand up for what they believe, they succeed. Another from Navalny: if they decide to kill me, it means we are incredibly strong. We need to utilize this power to not give up, to remember that we are a huge power that is being repressed by these bad dudes. We don't realize how strong we actually are. And another quote from Vladimir Kara-Murza: perhaps the most important requirement in an election is that voters have a choice. It sounds trivial, but that is something that has been lacking in most Russian elections held under Vladimir Putin's rule. And I'm sorry we're failing you. I'm personally sorry we're failing you. That the United States is. And I pray to God, I pray to Allah, that the EU, the UK, and others will not. And I pray, hopefully, that some of our leaders here will go ahead and have a little bit of semblance and of dignity and respect to the oaths they have taken, to also remember you can't appease an alligator and how much this is costing the Russian people and also the Ukrainian people. But I was speaking to the Russian people today. I've spoken a lot in regards to the Ukrainian people, but I was speaking to the Russian people today to hope there may be some more who stand up. And if you don't, I understand. I'm Cuban. The one time we stood up a few years ago, they went ahead and suppressed and repressed those protesters and threw them all in jail. And with that, it's time for some funny stories. You say yes. Because that was heavy. Yeah, it was heavy. But I mean, this is why war is horrible. And it's been going on for 3 years and it looks like there's no end in sight. And I mean, if one person hears it and that sparks a movement, then you know what? Fantastic. Speaking of sparking a movement, this duck that's terrorized Florida neighborhoods is sparking a movement. People running for their lives. That's a little hyperbolic, but you get the drift. But maybe not. This duck sent one person to the hospital. I had my eyes closed, and all of a sudden I felt on my hand a bite, and it was bleeding. What the heck? What kind of duck is this? Do ducks have teeth? I was pretty sure ducks don't have teeth. Every time I've seen Donald and Daffy Duck, they don't have teeth. Apparently, this duck's bill is pretty strong. Now, again, here's what is going on with these birds. We have the woodpecker in Massachusetts attacking cars. And then we have this duck who's been chasing neighbors and sent one of them to the hospital. What are we doing to these animals? Are these birds in tune with the climate change issue? They're saying, you're making it too damn hot here. Help us. I mean, I don't know. You give me a reason why this is happening. Now, here's what's interesting. Wildlife officials say the duck is protected by federal law and can be removed, but only by humane methods. Well, don't we have a government agency to do that? Or have they been cut by Doge? Oh! I mean, this is the South, right? I mean, you may tell someone there that this duck is protected by federal law. But why do I have a feeling that someone who's a responsible gun owner might say, okay, and then if that duck comes up on my porch, you better know. We're going to have duck tonight. By the way, foie gras is delicious. You need to try it. And I am not by any means advocating or encouraging anyone shooting this duck. I'm just saying I'm surprised that in the South, this duck is still alive. In San Francisco, this duck would be okay. In fact, this duck would be like a superstar. There'd be like TikTok reels, IG reels everywhere. This duck would be celebrated for terrorizing the residents. Speaking of cartoons, though, and you're like, why are we speaking of cartoons? You're just talking about ducks. Yeah, Daffy Duck, Donald Duck. Those were also some of the cartoons I grew up with. That's for the boomers, right? The Looney Tunes. But in Russia, Mr. Solovyovs has decided to create a cartoon with Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Kim Jong Un, Vladimir Putin, and Emmanuel Macron. And I think I'm missing one. They're all kids. They're all children. And it's a cartoon. What kind of crazed idea is this? Why would you create a cartoon with a bunch of political figures as children? Well, here's what the producer said. This is an ambitious step into the future, where political awareness starts in infancy. Propaganda! You mean, propaganda? You mean molding these young little minds before they have critical thinking skills? Wow. Apparently, in the cartoon, little Elon is playing with his Cybertrucks, which are doing horribly, by the way. Their sales are atrocious. Is he sitting there trying to pawn them off on the other child political figures, but nobody wants to play with him because he has a Cybertruck? And Kim Jong Un has a rocket, basically telling everyone that at one time he's going to try and bomb Seoul. Yeah, we already know, Kim Jong Un. That's why we're worried about you. And I got a question. What, Emmanuel Macron, doesn't he have rights on his... Doesn't he have rights on his person, on his childlike image? He must be saying, why did you put me with all of these autocratic figures or those who admire autocrat figures? What am I doing here? What if these things don't belong with the other? Emmanuel Macron's like, get me out of this cartoon. And what's really weird is Vladimir Putin is in a judo outfit. Apparently, he's a black belt in judo. Well, that's impressive, Vladimir. What was your record, by the way, in matches? How many times did you win? Like wins and losses. Can you tell us? I'm having a feeling nobody's ever asked you that question. I'm having a feeling that when you lost, you really didn't lose. And I'm having a feeling that if someone beat you, you said, let's go have a drink, and then they died because you poisoned them. I mean, funny, but not funny that he actually poisons his critics. By the way, Vladimir Karamurza was poisoned twice by Vladimir and survived. Incredible. Apparently, he is like Wesley from The Princess Bride, who developed an immunity to iocane powder. If you don't know where that's from, you got to watch Princess Bride. From a millennial and Gen X fans and boomers, they got it. Finally, and this is our last piece, what is the most revenue efficient company in the world? Meaning revenue per employee. Which has the highest revenue per employee? Now, I gave you the choices before. I'll give them to you again. It's NVIDIA, Apple, Cursor, Meta, Alphabet, OpenAI, Microsoft, Tesla, or Amazon. Now, if you're a smart investor, or an experienced investor, you're probably thinking Microsoft, Google, which is Alphabet, or Apple. You might even think NVIDIA. Those are all really good choices. Except the company that's the most revenue efficient, meaning makes most revenue per employee, is actually OnlyFans. That's right, OnlyFans. And by a substantial margin. If you said NVIDIA, well done, they're in second place. But they are nowhere near overtaking OnlyFans as the top spot. Well, that was it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of El Maestro. I really enjoyed giving it to you. I will look forward to going ahead and talking to you all next week. Talk to you all in a couple days. Stay lit.